In March of 2021, Canadians were told by the government and the media that there were mass clandestine graves being discovered at the sites of former Indian residential schools across the country. It wasn't just the claim of 215 Indigenous children being found in a mass grave at the site of the Kamloops Indian Residential School. There were several other claims of mass clandestine graves full of Indigenous children's remains. The media reported that story as fact, despite there being no evidence to back up those claims at all. But what there is evidence for is the fact that since those claims were made, over 100 churches have been burned or vandalized, statues of our former prime ministers and monarchs have been toppled, universities have been renamed, streets have been renamed, and we were forced to go into national mourning for almost half of the year. On top of all of that, many Canadians have actually lost their jobs for telling the truth about the Kamloops claim, that there is no evidence to make such a claim, and there is, so far as we know now, no mass grave. One of those people is Francis Widdowson, Canadian academic and former professor at Mount Royal University, who was wrongfully terminated for telling the truth about the Kamloops claim, that there is no evidence to make that assertion. Last week, while speaking on a campus tour about the Kamloops mass grave claim, Francis Widdowson and her cameraman were physically assaulted and swarmed by a group of Indigenous protesters. Now, if you haven't seen the footage, I don't blame you because the mainstream media haven't touched this story. But here it is.
You're full of shit! You don't know what you're talking about! Go home, you hick! Go home, you fucking hick!
That's where you belong! That's where you belong! That's where you belong! You belong right there! Right there! Underground! You belong underground! What you did to our kids, our ancestors!
You're an entitled old hag, you know? Fuck all you guys. Get me off that fucking camera.
On the other side, Francis Widdowson talks to me about what happened at the University of Winnipeg last week. Dr. Francis Widdowson, thank you for joining me. Explain to us what happened last Friday.
People will be very shocked if they aren't aware of what happened on Friday at the University of Winnipeg. So I should just put in context. I was at the University of Manitoba on Thursday, the University of Winnipeg on Friday. University of Manitoba had some, ridiculous things happen, but it functioned in a somewhat normal context, just with beating drums and so on. But what occurred is that people were very angry that what had happened at the University of Manitoba. This is the Indigenous gangsters. So there's a whole bunch of gangsters in Winnipeg who are very violent and nasty people, and they're not happy about the unmarked graves, the Kamloops case being discussed openly and honestly. They mobilized, a whole bunch of gangsters showed up on Friday, and there's a lot of women who are tools of the gangsters, and there's 6 of them who assaulted me, and I have the names of 3 of them. Anyway, they're used by the gangsters to surround people, treat them terribly, and if you react in any way that is sort of confrontational, the Indigenous gangsters will move in and begin to rough you up, and you don't even have to do anything. My cameraman, who was trying to cover the whole what was going on, was roughed up by about 8 gangsters and pushed outside of campus, and he feared for his life that day. That was how bad it was. There was a gangster who had gloves on with metal on his knuckles, and Michael Melanson, who was another person I know who was part of the research group, he thought he's a tough guy. Daniels wouldn't have hurt a fly. He's a computer science nerd. He's not used to bar fights. Melanson is fit and knows how to handle himself. he thought he was going to have to fight 40 people at one point. It was unbelievable, an unbelievable breakdown of civilization. Several people called the police. The police did not come. Security stood down, didn't do anything. And so we had a police force that does not protect its citizens because presumably it's afraid of the Aboriginal gangsters. I don't know what's going on there. And we have Wab Canoe, who is standing with one of the quote unquote elders who assaulted me on Friday. He's doing that, I believe, today. And Shingoose is the other one, who's also one of these women who's being used as a tool by these Aboriginal gangsters. Wake up, Winnipeg. Your city is being overrun by tribalist elements, and it's not going to go anywhere good. So what happened at the University of Winnipeg was really beyond belief. I was assaulted by 6 women. I had a drink poured on my head. I was taunted endlessly. And because I'm used to these scenarios, I'm very calm, and I do not rise to any of these provocations. I just continue to make the point. We need to have the truth about Kamloops, which is the claim that the remains of 250 children are buried in the apple orchard, and there is no evidence for that claim. And until we have a reckoning on that claim, we are not going to be able to move forward on reconciliation.
So for those that aren't aware, before we get more into the details of what happened over last week, just explain to the audience what you were doing at the campus to begin with. You were there to talk specifically about the Kamloops claim. You were there to have a dialogue with people. What was the nature of your appearance at the University of Winnipeg?
So what is happening is I've been trying to give talks across the country on the Kamloops case, and I get canceled by universities for a number of reasons: psychological harm, safety, psychological safety, etc. So what I'm doing now is I have a method that was developed by Peter Boghossian, who was a professor who was pushed out of Portland State University, and it's called Spectrum Street Epistemology. And you have 7 mats. They go from strongly agree to strongly disagree, and then you have neutral in the middle. You can just carry those mats around with you. You don't need space, and you just lay them out in any public area, and you make a claim such as the remains of 215 children have been found at the Kamloops Indian Residential School. That's the claim. And you ask people, are they strongly disagree, strongly agree? And you ask them to stand on the mat that best represents their certainty of this position. And then once they state their certainty, level of certainty, you ask them what evidence that they're using to develop this level of certainty and what evidence that they would need to become less certain or more certain. So it's an incredibly effective academic exercise to discuss a huge range of claims. And that's what I was trying to do at the University of Winnipeg on the claim, what's called residential school denialism is a barrier to reconciliation. That was the claim. And the reason why I chose that claim is because it was the claim that Negon Sinclair, who is one of the terrible bad actors at the University of Manitoba, was making on an event a couple of hours earlier. So I just wanted to investigate that claim. The previous day at the University of Manitoba, it was on the grave error at Kamloops was a hoax. That was the claim at the University of Manitoba. And I personally do not think it's a hoax. I'm on the slightly disagree mat. A wonderful student by the name of Callum also agreed that he doesn't think it's a hoax. Michael Melanson argued that he does think it's a hoax. So we had a very, very great discussion. And there was an Indigenous man, actually, a very sweet Indigenous man who participated in the session at the University of Manitoba. And we made great strides in trying to understand one another because he argued that my views were hateful. He thought that my views were hateful. And I was trying to understand why he believed that. So it's a fascinating way to bring critical thinking and open inquiry into universities. And you don't need space for it. So you can just do it anywhere in a public area. You don't have to worry about the university's nonsense about trying to cancel you. But of course, University of Winnipeg, we entered into a whole new level of dysfunction that we have to really have an understanding of before we can start to, move forward more in terms of what to do.
So, in other words, you were there to peacefully speak with people that, that disagree with you and to have an honest conversation. For those that haven't seen the clip, people were telling you that you should be underground for what you did to their children and ancestors at University of Winnipeg, this confrontation. And you brought up this concept of denialism. Those that are maybe aware or maybe not aware, the federal government a couple of years ago, through the special interlocutor on Indian residential schools and these unmarked graves claims, tried to make a law or tried to advocate that residential school denialism become a criminal offense. And Dr. Widdowson, you've been branded a denialist. And it seems to me that this attack on you was coordinated because I saw a statement from the Assembly of Chiefs of Manitoba, which was in coordination with the University of Winnipeg and the University of Manitoba. So all three groups publicly put out a statement, I think in relation to your event, that they, quote, would confront denial wherever it appears and to uphold and honor the truths of survivors. So it appears to me that what happened to you was coordinated with the help of the university. Do you share that same opinion?
I do, and I have evidence that even the Faculty Association, I believe his name is Peter J. Miller, and this is the most shocking thing, is that the president of the Faculty Association put out a statement talking about the lies of denialism. And I am taking him to task for this, because what happens is, because the Faculty Association took on that statement, made that statement, it makes all the faculty members at that university afraid to enter into the discussion, because they know if they are pursued through various disciplinary processes regarding this, the Faculty Association will not defend them fairly in whatever grievance process unfolds. So there's a huge number of actors who are involved in this intimidation. There's no other way to put it. They intimidate people with this allegation of denialism. It makes people afraid to think critically about this issue. And this allows these Indigenous gangsters to take over campuses like we saw at the University of Winnipeg.
I mean, I just think it's so absurd, and we should try to really break this down, right? You and your cameraman were confronted for opposing a narrative for which there is no evidence to support the narrative. There is no way for us to confirm this 215 bodies claim because there's been no excavation. And you're just saying that we don't have the evidence for that, and yet you are being confronted by it. Of course, there is a financial angle to all of this, because after this claim and after the claims made by other First Nations bands that they said they found mass graves, which were, again, just anomalies in the ground, millions and millions of dollars have been given to these bands to go and find out the truth. Do you think part of the reason why there is such pushback to you trying to get to the bottom of this 215 bodies at Kamloops claim is because there are financial strings attached to this very claim?
That's one of the reasons. So it's turning into a very complex situation, which I think requires a lot of analysis. But there's that. There seems to be a whole edifice of truth and reconciliation, what's called truth and reconciliation, which is got nothing to do with truth and reconciliation. It's in fact falsehoods and authoritarianism. That's really what's going on. And using Indigenous peoples as tools for whatever interests are pursuing this with such vigor. Because I have a graphic that I'm going to post again on my social media, which has a house of cards. And one of the cards being pulled out has the word Kamloops on it. And I really do think that's what's going on here, is that these interests will fight very, very hard to keep the Kamloops false claim going, because the house of cards is kind of on top of that, and it's all going to start to crumble if that's happened. So trying to understand that house of cards is a bit difficult, but there was the immediate financial gain, $12.1 million for the excavations that were supposed to have been done between 2021 to 2023. There was a whole bunch of other lawsuits and $320 million for GPR work that got distributed. There was UNDRIP that got the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples that got pushed through, which has a whole bunch of other financial sorts of elements to it. So it's a big complex kind of situation which needs to be investigated. But the problem is that when you try to begin to investigate it, you get all this intimidation that starts to happen, and and even the threats that they're going to criminalize what you're talking about. So it now is a very open question as to what exactly are the interests that are behind the Kamloops claim.
Have any Indigenous leaders, to your knowledge, spoken up and denounced the intimidation and assaults that you faced and your cameraman faced?
Aaron Pete has done so. I saw him make a statement on Twitter, or he was responding to someone. So he's a beacon. He's a beacon of hope. Yeah, and he's from Hope. It's quite it's quite fitting. He's a wonderful man. He's taken a lot of risks with doing what he's doing. I'm hoping it'll give other Aboriginal leaders courage to step forward, or maybe allow new leaders to emerge. It's very, very difficult for Aboriginal people to do this, of course, because you've got a lot of gangsters that you're dealing with. That's the only way to characterize them. They're completely violent people who will make your life an absolute misery if you oppose them. And so this is what's got to be faced. All this nonsense about, Truth and Reconciliation Day and the Orange Shirt Day. This is not addressing the actual problems, and we need to get very serious about this. And I'm quite shaken by what happened at the University of Winnipeg, and I'd like to make things better, not worse. So I've got to think very, very carefully. And I'm hoping I can be in touch with some other Aboriginal leaders who are very concerned. There might have been ones who made comments who I haven't seen, so I don't know, but no one has approached me yet about it. But you have to be very concerned, the leadership, because when people see that footage, and we got lots of footage coming out of Winnipeg, this is not going to look good for the people that were involved. It's not going to look good at all.
Well, speaking of Aaron Pete, he has a podcast, Nuanced, which I know you've been on, and he, in fact, just had an interview with BC Conservative MLA Aliyah Warbus. I think I'm pronouncing that name correctly. Yep. And I just found out that she's actually the deputy leader of the BC Conservative Party, questioning why people like MLA Dallas Brody, and I think yourself as well, although she doesn't name you, but I have a feeling, questioning why people like you and others are so outspoken on the Kamloops claims. Listen to this.
My big question, it comes down to being very, very simple, and that is why. And you can never truly get someone to answer that question. Yeah. And we don't even know if they've asked themselves that. Yeah. And the issue with going on a deep dive down all of these rabbit holes of what actually happened in this instance with these 215 anomalies and poking holes into the residential school narrative. You can call it a pursuit of truth, but quite honestly, is that the best use of an elected person's time? But if that becomes your main narrative and your passion, and then you start to gain a following, and I would say almost like a cult sort of, explosion in your identity, and you become known to be this Indigenous narrative witch hunter, it just kind of begs the question of why. Why is that the top issue to you?
So, Frances, she doesn't quite know why people care about this story. And she doesn't think that anyone's actually answered that question. So I want to give you the chance. Why does this story matter so much to you?
It matters because the truth is very, very important. And if we don't have a society that pursues a universal truth, and this is what Dallas Brody has been getting at, it's not about your truth. It's not about my truth. It's not about whomever's truth. It doesn't, and I know she said grandmother's truth, etc., like elders' truth. It doesn't, that's not the issue. It is a universal truth that we're all trying to find. Now, we never actually reach the truth because we could be mistaken on a number of different elements, but we're trying to find it. If you don't have that, you have lost the capacity to communicate as a civilization, and you will not be able to solve any problems. And Warbus, from the clip that I have watched, talks about how people didn't return home. There was this terrible abuse. They were starved, these kinds of questions. Now, those are hypotheticals as to whether those happened in what conditions and so on. And we need to get the facts on the ground about everything that's happened to be able to say, okay, well, that was a situation. We now understand that. How can we develop policies to be able to address whatever the actual effects are of those actual things that occurred? What's happened with Kamloops is there's a lot of things that have been fabricated, either intentionally or unintentionally. It doesn't have to be intentional. That's why I don't think it's necessarily a hoax, is because when you listen to people like Ted Gottfriedson Jr., I think he does believe that there are children buried in the apple orchard. But because that's now set the tone of this horrible killing of children, it's getting people to act in response, which is not based upon a rational understanding of the situation. And that's not going to enable us to have reconciliation. You know, we've heard time and time again, in order to have reconciliation, you must have truth. I totally believe that. I think that that is the case. But the reason for that is that actual coming together to figure out things must be based upon a common understanding, or the best understanding that we can have about these matters. And because there's a lot of intimidation that is going on, we have not been able to develop the common understanding that we need to move forward to actually achieve some kind of better world for both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people.
And I think that's probably the most important part, is the fact that, look, from what I've seen walking through Winnipeg and through Calgary and through some of these cities where there is a large number of Indigenous people, you can't ignore the fact that there are serious problems on the ground today faced by Indigenous Canadians that seem to be more serious and more acute than their other countrymen. And I think it's obvious something has gone wrong. Something is clearly not right in our approach, in the government's approach to this issue, and there are real issues that need to be addressed. But I just don't know how the current truth and reconciliation industry, because there is an industry around this, I don't know how this industry is helping Indigenous people at all. Because seeing it for what it is, seeing what I've seen is heartbreaking. I just don't think these people that are in this industry, this truth and reconciliation industry, are doing anything to genuinely advance the lives of Indigenous people.
Yes, and they are not. They are making money off of this. They are money, power, etc. Neo-tribal elites, they're one part of it, but it's the lawyers. Like, the lawyers are the main beneficiaries of this entire system, largely non-Aboriginal lawyers. And we are not facing the actual problem, which is, and this is going to be surprising on your show, but I'm going to bring up the person who developed this understanding, and it was Leon Trotsky who developed the theory of uneven and combined development. Hunting and gathering societies are less culturally developed than modern nation states, and what you're seeing, all the fetal alcohol syndrome problems, which were very evident in Winnipeg, is because people, who have a hunting and gathering cultural features do not know how to participate in modern society. And development of understanding, scientific understanding is part of that. And they do not have that. All these elders who were talking to us on Friday, and I got to have a lot of conversations, they were a bit tense, but I just listened to people. They think that you just must believe the knowledge keepers. That is not going to help us to pursue the truth, because the knowledge keepers have a lot of false beliefs that they hold. They don't look at things critically. They do not have a wider view. That's what we developed as a civilization through the scientific method, which you need writing for. And Aboriginal cultures were pre-literate, so they don't have a scientific understanding of the world. Yet we're trying to use this pre-scientific cultural features to help Aboriginal peoples in a scientific world. And that is not going to help Aboriginal peoples to be able to participate in modern society. So we need to understand the developmental problem. And it's not got anything to do with race. It's got to do with cultural features that did not have the technology to be able to develop to the point where they can participate in a modern society. That's not what's going to be addressed. And if it's not addressed, you're going to have Aboriginal people under the control of these unbelievably violent Aboriginal gangsters. And that is what's happening in Winnipeg today. And it was a frightening situation. And we want to get past that. We want to help all the marginalized Aboriginal people, but wearing the orange shirts and all the industry features that are around this, that's not going to help anyone. And we need to face up to this situation.
Well, I think I speak for many when I say that we want you to keep going out there and speaking the truth and fighting for free speech, because there's no justification for attacking someone for their speech, and that's what we saw directed at you. So we'll leave it there.
Can I just say one thing to end?
Yes.
University of Winnipeg, I am demanding that you rent space for me to bring Spectrum Street epistemology on the claims that you have made about me. You have defamed me. The Faculty Association has implied that I'm a liar. It is your responsibility to book space so that I can do Spectrum Street epistemology at your institution.
Well, I'm happy to host that message, and I hope it's seen by the University of Winnipeg. Francis Widdowson, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on.
If you like that discussion and you want to see more, be sure to like this video, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and share this video with your network. Thank you all for watching.